Good morning, everybody. BDO44 coming at you with another video. All right, so I'm going to attempt to make a prediction on the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Dallas Mavericks. I'm really upset at myself because on the Eastern Conference, I totally botched the Pacers' entire playoff path, and it kind of negated some of what my point really was. I don't know why I had the Pacers playing the Sixers in the first round when they actually played the Bucks, but I just want to correct that before we get started. Is what it is. Go check that out. Still love that I made that video, but a lot of what my point was kind of got negated by that. But nevertheless, in this situation, we're talking about the Mavericks and the Minnesota Timberwolves, and this is one of the best Western Conference Finals matchups we've seen in a while, in my opinion. I'm very excited about how these two teams match up. Now, the Dallas Mavericks, in my opinion, they just came off of a series where they were able to knock off the defending. No, it was. See, I'm about to make a mistake again. They knocked off the OKC Thunder, a team that's been number one seed all year long. And before that, played the Los Angeles Clippers in a tough matchup where they were able to knock off the Clippers as well. Dallas has really had one of the tougher paths in the playoffs on either conference. Really tough matchups, but they've been able to overcome with what I call an evolving roster. That's what I call it. And the reason why I call it an evolving roster is because throughout the course of the season, they didn't have Daniel Gafford and PJ Washington, and they've been working those guys into the equation slowly but surely. And when doing so, they had kind of moved Derek Lively further back to the depth chart. As this playoffs has kind of, gone on, they've been working Derek Lively into the lineup along with using those two guys. So they're evolving in the sense that their team is starting to learn how to use more of what it has in that front court, and it's affecting their defense a lot. They've worked Derek Jones Jr. into a bigger role. Jaden Hardy and not Jeff Green, but can't think of Green's first name, but those guys are starting to get worked into the equation a bit more. In the last game, they kind of benched Tim Hardaway Jr. He's had a rough series against the Thunder. So their roster is changing as we're going along. Jason Kidd is finding things that he likes in the roster. He's moving things around that he could prefer to live without. And as a result, they're turning into a bigger, longer defensive lineup that can get offensive rebounds, that can have great point of attack defense with some of those wings that they have out there. And even though everything revolves around Luka and Kyrie, what revolves around Luka and Kyrie complements them quite a bit when you consider what they can do defensively with the players mentioned. Derek Jones Jr. has turned into an offensive player as of late, which, he had like 22 points in the last game. So if they can count on his offense continuing to evolve, that brings a new dynamic to their team. So I just look at them as a team that's starting to slowly form into something that they haven't been all season. So when you look at the Dallas Mavericks matchup against the Minnesota Timberwolves throughout the season, the Minnesota Timberwolves won 3 out of 4, but they didn't have those players. They hadn't made the trade yet. The last time they saw the Mavericks, Grant Williams was still on the team, and they've since traded him to Charlotte for PJ Washington, a massive piece to what they do right now, and a fantastic defender and offensive player. So Dallas, when you try to do homework on Dallas, what you got to understand is what they showed you may not be what they show you going forward, because they are getting better. And that is concerning going into the series if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves. When you try to do some homework on them and try to see how you match up against them, you realize you haven't seen this team. You haven't. You've seen Kyrie and Luka. You've seen some of their other pieces. But the team that they've become over the last several weeks is not a team that you face this season. And they match up much better with you than what you probably would imagine. So that is what I'm looking at right now. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves obviously are the best team playing right now, if you ask me. I know people would say the respect should go to Boston for having a big record, but in the Eastern Conference, winning 64 games is impressive, but not nearly as impressive as what Minnesota's been doing in these playoffs, in my opinion. So I give the edge to Minnesota right now. It's the best team in the league. I personally think that Minnesota has already faced a team that is better than Dallas Mavericks in the Denver Nuggets. And they were able to knock the Denver Nuggets off in that last series in pretty impressive fashion, playing some fantastic defense. Even though they dropped 3 straight games in the series, which is kind of concerning looking back on it, they were still able to withstand that storm and win the final 2 games to put themselves in a position to win that series. I think the Minnesota Timberwolves have shown me that they're one of the most elite defenses that I've seen, period. The way they played game 2 of that second round against Denver was some of the best defense I'd seen in a very long time, man. I compare it to some of those San Antonio teams, the 2001 Lakers, several great defensive teams over the years. The Minnesota Timberwolves have proven that they have that ability with Rudy Gobert as the anchor in the paint. And then guys like Jaden McDaniels playing fantastic defense. Anthony Edwards out there, of course. Naz Reid, who's turned into a respectable defender in the paint. Kyle Anderson playing great defense. Mike Conley, who is expected to be a game-time decision for Game 1 tonight. So that's a little concerning if Mike Conley's not going to be out there. They do have limited point guard play. I don't know what's going on with Monte Morris. I haven't seen him in a while. He might be hurt. I don't know what's going on there, but I ain't seen him in a while. But, their point guard position going into this series, I'd imagine Anthony Edwards going to have the ball in his hands a bit more. But Minnesota makes its money on the defensive end. That's how they do it. And they're damn good at it, man. When you talk about Jaden McDaniels and how disruptive he could be defensively alone, you could throw him on the best player and just have him just basically be skin on that person. So it can get really tricky out there going up against the Minnesota Timberwolves, especially with Luka Doncic not being 100% healthy. He's dealing with a knee. He's playing through it, but that's really a concern for me if I'm a Dallas Maverick fan, is the type of defense that's going to be thrown at him versus how healthy he's expected to be in the series. At this time of year, everybody's hurt. You get this far into the playoffs, you're dealing with injuries that have been going on for months. Everybody is. So I don't expect anybody to be completely 100%. But when you look at the Minnesota Timberwolves, ultimately, they have their concerns with Mike Conley not being healthy. And, of course, Dallas is playing through injury there. So, Maxi Kleber is also still out for the Dallas Mavericks. That would be a very important wing for them, defensive wing, that they could throw in to provide themselves some depth. I don't know when he's going to be returning. If he's going to return at all in this series, that also can be a factor for the Dallas Mavericks. So, both of these teams are dealing with a little injury stuff. You got to give credit to Karl Anthony Towns, who's also dealing with a little bit of a knee. He hurt himself in the last game a little bit, but he's playing through it. Had a fantastic series against the Denver Nuggets. And, he's going to have to continue to play the way that he's been playing to get his team to the finals. I think that some of what he does can be matched by P.J. Washington if P.J.'s playing well, stretching the floor at the 4 spot. Gafford and of course Lively, they're all playing exceptionally well at the center position. So the matchups there are interesting. Naz Reid, obviously on the Minnesota side of things, Rudy Gobert. It's going to be a much more comparable matchup than I think people are anticipating when you consider those names and how they are all down there playing significant minutes for both teams. I think this series could go down to the wire. I really do. I'd imagine this goes 6 or 7 games. The teams match up too well with one another. I do think they're going to be games where Minnesota's going to stifle Dallas a bit. But I look at a guy like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving as defense busters. You can play your best defense, so they still going to get loose and get good shots off. And I look at the same thing goes for Anthony Edwards on the other end. You can still play fantastic defense. He's still going to get good shots off. Question is, of those superstars, who's going to impose their will the most? Of those guys, can 2 on one end outplay the 2 on the other end? And the 2 for Minnesota would be Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns, in my opinion. But the way Jaden McDaniels been playing offense, I think he could contribute quite a bit. The way Derek Jones been shooting the ball, he can contribute quite a bit. So you got X factors on both sides. This is why these two teams are where they are. It's because not only have their stars been showing up, but their role players have been elevating on both sides. So this is a tricky matchup, man. You know, you talk about Derek Jones versus Jaden McDaniels. I mean, Jaden McDaniels, I think, is ultimately a better player, but the way Derek Jones has elevated his game, he can match him right now. The way he's been playing, he's just as good. So that's a matchup to watch. You know, I like how they've been getting things out of guys like Kyle Anderson. Can Green match his production? Can Hardaway match you know, Hardy's production or exceed it? Not Hardy, but you know, some of those other guys, Kyle Anderson and so on and so forth. The role players on both sides are going to have to elevate their game to match the elevation of the players coming at them on the other side. So I think it's going to be a dogfight. I think it's going to be a matchup of who can execute down the stretch, who can play the best defense, who can control the boards, and both teams should have nights where they outdo the other. That's why I think this can go all the way to 7, because it could be back and forth in this series. Now, Minnesota does have the home court advantage. I think that could be a plus for Minnesota. I think Minnesota's widely been understood to be the better team all season long. But as I said, Minnesota is going up against a team in Dallas that has just gotten so much better in a short amount of time in these playoffs. I think they've improved quite a bit in the playoffs. Now you got to consider Derek Lively, who had 22 points or 14 boards and some blocks in the last game, in the closeout game against the OKC Thunder. I mean, if he's going to play like that, that's a dynamic that you're not probably working into your equation unless you're paying close enough attention. So homework is very important for both coaches on either side. Jason Kidd's got his work cut out for him to try to figure out how to deal with all the size that's going to be coming at him, how to overcome the defense and the wings out there, and guys like you know, as I said, Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert, and you know, it's gonna be a real test for Luka Doncic to try to outduel Anthony Edwards, who's just playing great. Obviously more healthy, younger, 22 years old, and it's just been, you know, out of this world on both sides of the floor. You know what I mean? It's very difficult to keep him out of the lane. So that's going to be a test for the bigs of the Dallas Mavericks, try to keep him out of the lane while not fouling so much to send him to the line a million times. You know, Kyrie Irving, obviously, as I said, Kyrie Irving's the type of dude that can bust up any defense. It doesn't really matter who's guarding him. He's gonna be able to shake it loose. That's just the gift that he has out there. Obviously going to get to the line. Can he stay healthy throughout the course of this physical series? That's going to be a question. He's healthy right now. He's going to have to remain healthy because this is a series he's going to be tested. Them dudes are going to hit him. Naz Reid, extremely important player on the other side. He's going to stretch the floor the way he's been doing? You know, Naz Reid against the Lakers turns into Karl Malone or something like that. Can he do a lot against the Dallas Mavericks to try to match what P.J. Washington's probably going to be doing in that same vein? This is very important matchup right there. Naz Reid versus P.J. Washington. Production-wise, who can play better this series may determine who wins the series between those two players. In my opinion, it could very well come down to those two supporting stars. So, you know, Rudy Gobert is a fantastic defensive player. Sometimes he could be a bit stagnant out there. You can have empty possessions out there with him missing layups and it kind of being caught in situations where he's being taken advantage of defensively. You know, you don't want him isolated on Luka Doncic out in the paint. You try to get those situations to a minimum. You don't want that type of stuff getting switched out on Luka, pulling him out of the paint. So, you know, these are different things that are just coming to mind for me. I'm wondering who's going to be able to take advantage of what. You know, Luka Doncic, I believe, is probably the best player in the series. I know a lot of people think it's Anthony Edwards. I think Anthony's right there with him. I just think Luka's just a little better right now. And I expect they will both have their moments in this series, man. They will both have big moments in this series. But the way Ant-Man has been playing, he's a little healthier. I do expect for him to outplay Luka despite not being the better player in my mind. I think Ant-Man will probably have the better series. He's just healthier, man. I count on his younger body to push through this series a bit more, not trust Luka Doncic coming into it with an injury. So this is going to be serious, man. This is going to be a serious series. The Minnesota Timberwolves have proven to me their defensive prowess is not a fluke. And Dallas has proven to me that they're an evolving team that can only get better as they continue to push forward. Can Maxi Kleber return to the series? Is Conley's injury serious at all? Or will he be himself in the series? If Conley's not a part of this series, I'm very concerned for the Minnesota Timberwolves and their continuity. Obviously, Ant-Man can play some defense. Can control the ball and handle the ball is what I'm trying to express. But in the last series, one thing we did see was that the Denver Nuggets, for short periods of the time at the beginning of the game, the closeout game, were able to stifle him by putting big bodies on him everywhere he turned. So they were doubling him, and that double was working for a while. Dallas has the same ability to put defensive players in front of him that are as big as him, like Derrick Jones Jr. and P.J. Washington and Green. They're able to put those guys on him and kind of double and create that same dynamic. If that dynamic works, it's going to be hard, in my opinion, for the Minnesota Timberwolves to keep up with the Dallas Mavericks' ability to score the ball when you got Kyrie Irving, who's going to pretty much be able to score on every possession, and Luka Doncic having that same gift. So it's going to be very important Minnesota doesn't go on long stretches where they don't score the ball. It's very important to execute well against this team and continue to put pressure on them defensively, slowing down guys like Tim Hardaway Jr. and P.J. Washington on the offensive end. If you could slow those guys down, keep them under 107 points, Minnesota should be able to win a lot of these games. But if Dallas is scoring above 115, 120 points, I think that favors Dallas, because I just look at Dallas as having a little more offensively, in theory, depending on how well Carl and Nas are scoring. And, of course, McDaniels, if he could score in the 20s, that's a big deal in helping the Minnesota Timberwolves score. So I look at the Dallas Mavericks as a team that's probably more capable of scoring. And I look at the Minnesota Timberwolves as probably the better defensive team in this series. But they're not too far away from one another on either side. It's not like these are deficient teams on either of those ends. So that's what comes to mind, man. I just really like this series for both teams, depending on health. This is a 7-game series in my mind. It could come down to 2 possessions, 1 possession down the stretch, and who has more poise down the stretch of these basketball games, who can hit the big shots down the stretch of these basketball games, who has home court advantage. That kind of thing could really tell the difference in this series. And I'm not writing Dallas off. I'm telling you, I think a lot of people are writing Dallas off because we've seen Minnesota do such a fantastic job against the Denver Nuggets and already knock off the defending champions. But I've also seen Dallas go into Clipperland, beat them with no home court advantage, go into OKC and beat them with no home court advantage. So they've been slaying Goliaths all playoffs. So this would just be another Goliath that they would ultimately slay if they're able to win it. So that's really the truth, man. I don't think it's a great bet either way. Somebody's going to win, but I don't think this is a conventional series at all because these two teams match up well with one another. I don't think either one of them really have NBA championship experience outside of Kyrie Irving, who's won a ring. I don't know if anybody else in this series has won anything. So they're a little green out there. And, you know, because of the fantastic defensive ability of a Minnesota Timberwolves, I think there are going to be some games that Kyrie's not going to be able to go all the way off. It's not going to be a smooth sailing, impose his will type of series. He's going to get his spots. He's going to get his numbers, but they're going to rough him up. I see this being a very physical series for Kyrie Irving. I think his health is the thing that I'm circling for the Dallas Mavericks. If for some reason he gets knocked out of this series, it's over. And so it's just going to be important for him to continue to play good defense. Kyrie's been playing some really good defense in these playoffs, so he's going to have to continue to do that. Mike Conley's a little hobbled. I think he could take advantage of that. And I'd imagine they're not going to put Mike Conley on Kyrie for too much. They're going to put Jaden McDaniels on Kyrie. They're going to put other players on him. Anthony Edwards probably going to get some looks on Kai. It's going to be interesting to see who guards Luka Don. And I think it could get a little tricky when you start talking about matchups for the Minnesota Timberwolves against the Dallas Mavericks. Because if you put the wrong defender on the wrong player, somebody else going off. P.J. Washington can go for 31 points. If you don't put the right defender on him, he can be the focal point of scoring. You know what I mean? It's happened before. You think that Tim Hardaway's out of this series and all of a sudden he's going off for 30 points. So these are the type of things Minnesota cannot allow to happen. I don't think Minnesota has that dynamic as much as Dallas does. If you're not getting big scoring out of Ant-Man, Karl Towns, Naz Reid, chances are you're not getting big scoring out of really anybody else. Rudy ain't scoring. I don't expect Kyle Anderson to really put up any big scoring numbers. It becomes a situation where I don't see as much offensive firepower on the Minnesota side if their big stars aren't doing it. And so that's a real thing, man. I think the versatility offensively of the Dallas Mavericks is just a little superior to Minnesota in my mind. But that may not be something they can really do anything in regards to pushing forward if Minnesota's defense is as stifling as it was in Game 2. And so that's what we're looking at. Minnesota's a fantastic defensive team, as we know, and could offset that. So I don't know which way to go with this, man. I think the Dallas team is a little deeper. I think Minnesota is a little more top-heavy. I'm concerned about the non-offensive players on the Minnesota side versus the uber-talented offensive talent on the Dallas side. I think if Derrick Jones Jr. continues to score the way that he's been scoring, that could really create a problem for the Minnesota Timberwolves. They don't need him getting 22 and 23 points. They need him to get back down to 12, 11, and under. They got to be able to control him. On the other side, same with McDaniels. You can't have McDaniels going off for 22, 23 points. They got to negate his scoring and bring him back down. And so those two are going to have to cancel each other out and play excellent defense against whoever they're put on, and they're likely going to be put on some of the best players on the other side. So those are my X factors in this series. Derrick Jones Jr. and Xavier McDaniels. Who's better between the two? Who's going to ball out between the two? P.J. Washington versus Naz Reid. Circling them. Who's going to be better between the two? Whoever answers that could determine to win the series in my mind. Karl's going to have to stay healthy. You can't get kicked out of the series just like Kyrie can on the other side. Who's going to be more productive between the two of them? Who's going to be more efficient between the two of them? This is an even series, man. It's even. It's even. And if Luka Don hits a game-winning shot at Game 7 at the buzzer to win the series, it won't shock me because that's the type of series this is, man. It's exactly the type of series this is. So, the way I feel right now, I've seen so much good out of the Minnesota Timberwolves, it's hard for me to pick against them. I think they've been the best team. But I could argue that they're running into somebody that matches up with them as well as anybody. They had some size advantages against the Denver Nuggets. And the Denver Nuggets didn't run as deep as the Dallas Mavericks. Phoenix was a two-man team, basically. They really didn't test anybody at all there. I think the matchups for Minnesota are a little tricky against Dallas. And Dallas is a team that's been beating people better than them all series, all playoffs, basically. So I'm worried about Minnesota in this series more so than I was going into the Denver series. I'm a little more worried about Minnesota in this series. I think people are writing Minnesota into the finals, and I think they got a worthy opponent that could potentially keep them out of it. That's what I'm telling y'all. Dallas is just to try hard, play defense well enough, catch you off guard because they're changing as a team as they go along type of squad that can make this a very, very uncomfortable series for the Minnesota Timberwolves. And while everybody's riding the Minnesota Timberwolves wave, including myself, I look at that Dallas team and I say they hit them just right. Just like I said the Pacers do to the Celtics, I think the Dallas Mavericks do the same thing to the Minnesota Timberwolves. I really do, man. I really do. I think Luka Don is not to be toyed with in any way, shape, or form. And his experience getting to the Western Conference Finals is something that's going to be important in this series as well. Jason Kidd's experience having won a championship as a player and being in situations where he won a championship as an assistant coach with the Lakers. I think he was the coach when they went to the Western Conference Finals as well, if I'm not mistaken. I thought he was. I think that experience can help. So it's a lot there pointing at Dallas in my mind. I know that Minnesota's probably the sexy team that everybody wants to pick. And the way they play defense could potentially do enough to stifle Dallas. I think, listening to the experts, they say Dallas will probably lose in 6. My mind's eye tells me to be a little more cautious with that. It's a little more cautious with that, man. Because I do see, even though Minnesota's a fantastic defensive team, Dallas, to me, seems a little more fluid offensively, and I don't think Dallas is going to go on some of the scoring droughts that Minnesota could potentially go on, especially since Dallas has turned himself into a good defensive and long team. And if Derek Lively is going to produce like he did in the last series, that could negate some of the production of Rudy Gobert, who's going to be deficient offensively at times. I don't trust Rudy Gobert to do the turnaround fadeaway jumper ever again. We saw that once. You'll never see it again. So Ant-Man is going to have to push past Luka to Don. Karl Towns going to have to push past Kyrie Irving. And I'd be lying if I said I really see that coming. Naz Reid is going to have to outplay P.J. Washington. Daniel Gafford's down there. I think people are underestimating the size of the Dallas Mavericks. The size of the Dallas Mavericks, Lively, Gafford, and Washington versus Karl, Gobert, and Naz. Who's going to be more consistent throughout the course of the series? Who's going to impose their will? The way that PJ's been playing, coupled with who I know he is, because I paid close attention to him in Charlotte. He helps things on both sides of the floor. He's still a new team to the Western Conference. People ain't really been watching him. They don't know what he can do. This dude can play as good as Naz Reid. He might be better than Naz Reid, the reigning 6th man of the year. So, Kyle Anderson, I don't trust Kyle Anderson that much. He tends to do some weird stuff on the basketball floor. His jumper's not reliable. If I'm trying to match him up with the production I expect to come from a guy like Green or a guy like Hardy or a guy like Tim Hardaway, I'm inclined to trust Tim and them more than Kyle. He has not really impressed me in these playoffs. So if I can't trust him, I start looking down the depth chart of the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'm like, they don't like to go too deep into their bench. You don't really see some of them dudes back there, the McLaughlins, the Luka Garzas. They don't really use them dudes. If the guys they're using aren't really playing well, they're really not turning nowhere else. That concerns me about the Minnesota Timberwolves. Dallas don't have that problem. Dallas does not have that problem. So, yeah, man, I think I'm going to be honest with y'all, man. I didn't talk myself into picking the Dallas Mavericks in 7. I really have, man. I think I'm going to go Dallas in 7. I love the Minnesota Timberwolves. I'll be happy to see them in the finals. I don't have any problem being wrong here. And I think that the matchups are comparable. But I think Derrick Jones Jr. is just enough to match what I expect coming from McDaniels. The way Derrick Jones been playing, if he continues to play like that, he's going to be the McDaniels of the Dallas Mavericks. Derek Lively continuing to get better, coupled with what's powering him to play well, having gone through the tragedy that he did earlier in the season. I think you're going to see a very, very inspired Derek Lively coming off the bench. And I think that's going to create a lot of problems offensively, defensively, and on the boards for a Minnesota team who's going to continue to try to run the same 3 centers over and over again, who are likely going to get in foul trouble. Karl's dealing with the knee. That concerns me. I think Derek Lively can impose his will and meet them at the summit on some of them boards, get blocks, catch lobs. He's just healthier, fresher legs, man. Rookie, he got fresher legs, man. That really matters. Rudy Gobert going up against guys like Daniel Gafford. Gafford can be a little more energetic than Rudy, catching lobs. I just think they have healthier centers over here in Dallas. The center's position should be more energetic and more healthy. Obviously not more talented than Karl. But like I said, PJ, if he plays his best, he can give you some of what Karl's giving you, stretching the floor and scoring the ball, getting to the line, doing things. He can run cold too. So if PJ has a bad series, all bets are off. He's going to have to play well. Because I'm more inclined to expect Karl to play more consistently. He's a better player. But it's not that PJ can't match his production or outplay him in a certain game. He can. And that's not including still looking at what Kyrie and Luka are prone to do. And when you get this far into the playoffs, Kyrie and Luka are going to definitely play great ball. That's going to happen. And I just think when it comes down to it, who do I trust to execute down the stretch of a basketball game? I definitely trust Anthony Edwards. No question. After that, when it comes to Minnesota, after that, McDaniel's still proving himself. Karl Towns can be a little fluky at times. Rudy Gobert is not a scorer. Conley's not starting the season series healthy, which is really concerning in that regard. So how their offense runs, if he's not 100%, that's going to play into the Dallas Mavericks' favor. So I'm looking at these teams and how this series is starting. Minnesota is going to have home court advantage. If they can win the first 2 games, you feel great about them. Obviously, I don't know that Dallas can come back and win 4 out of 5 against them. But if Dallas gets one of the first 2 games, or if they get both of these first 2 games, we're looking at a very, very uncomfortable series for Minnesota, who most believe is the better team. I'm going to go underdog here, man. I'm going to go underdog here. I don't think Minnesota's going to win the series. I think Dallas is going to win the series. I think they're going to shock the world and get to the finals and push past Minnesota, who's been a better defensive team, but not crazy better than Dallas has become in these playoffs. And I think that a lot of people are looking at Dallas as in the totality of what they've been, and I'm looking at what they've just turned into over the last 2 weeks. This Dallas Mavericks team is good enough to beat the Minnesota Timberwolves that we're seeing right here. They're good enough to do it, especially if that Minnesota team is going to have a hobbled Karl Anthony Towns and a hobbled Mike Conley. I just think that that's a real problem. If Karl's 100%, could change my mind. If he's going for 50 or 70 points and all this other stuff, could change my mind. Ant-Man's going to be Ant-Man, but Ant-Man has long stretches where he gets stifled by bigger bodies. I saw it with my own eyes. Denver was successful against him in the first half of Game 6. Game 7, rather, and that was concerning. He couldn't get nothing off. Everywhere he turned, they put a body in front of him. It's like anywhere he tried to turn, it was someone big in front of him. And I know for a fact that Dallas has that exact same dynamic to throw at him with PJ and Derrick Jones. I think it's going to be a problem. I really do. Not that Ant-Man can't get his 35 points, but he's going to have to work damn hard to get them. Harder than he did against Denver, in my opinion. So, yeah, I'm going to pick Dallas. I'm just going to go with my gut. My gut is telling me to pick Dallas in the series. Dallas in 7. I think the best player in the series is in Dallas. I think the most experienced player in the series is in Dallas as well, in Kyrie Irving. And I trust these players. I trust those two. A guy like Anthony Edwards is proving himself to be trustworthy. But the rest of his staff around him, I don't trust like that. I don't trust Gobert like that. I don't trust Karl like that. McDaniels is becoming somebody I could trust, and maybe he can continue to earn that in this series, but it's not solidified. Naz Reid, 6th man of the year, I trust him against the Lakers, but he's had games where he's going for 6 points after, and you know what I mean? It's like he's not as trustworthy as probably given credit because of how well he's played in the games he's played well. But when he doesn't play well, it really draws away from the Minnesota Timberwolves team. Is he going to be as consistent as I expect PJ Washington to be? I don't think so. I think PJ's probably going to outplay Nas in the series. You know what I mean? And so that's the problem. Everything that Minnesota does that influences power is matched in some fashion by the Dallas Mavericks. Everything. You got bigs, we got bigs. You got the wingy dude that can defend and be all over the place with wiry strength, we got that. You got guys that can score the ball like Anthony Edwards and Karl Towns. They got that in Dallas with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. And when it comes down to it, when your defense is great, it still can't necessarily beat great offense. Great defense doesn't beat great offense in a lot of cases. And when I look at the great defense of the Minnesota Timberwolves versus the great offense of a Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic, this close to an NBA championship, I expect for those two to squeeze past this team that has less experience. I do. I expect I'm looking at Kyrie Irving and I'm saying, I expect you to take care of this series. I expect you and your great gift that is far superior to anything anybody else got when you could dribble the ball the way you do. And Luka the Don, who I know and believe to be the best player in this series, I count on them, if the money's on the line, to overcome great defense and win the series, to execute down the stretch a little better than a team that only has one player in Anthony Edwards that I actually trust to do that. It's basically 2 versus 1 in that situation. And then it's about, can Minnesota's strengths impose themselves against Dallas, who happens to have those same strengths in those same areas. 2 versus 1. That's what I see. So that's what I'm telling y'all, man. I think the structure of the Minnesota Timberwolves can be disrupted by Mike Conley's potential injury. Even though he's a game-time decision, probably could be healthy, probably that doesn't play a part. I'm looking at it as it could. If he's hobbled, if he's not his 100% self, that's really going to play in the hands of a guy like Kyrie Irving, who's going to dance all over everybody. And so, I'm telling y'all, man, it just comes down to who do you trust. And even though I've seen the Minnesota Timberwolves play great, I also seen the Minnesota Timberwolves benefit from matchups that favor them. They benefited in matchups against the Denver Nuggets. Denver Nuggets didn't play well all playoffs long. They ran into my Laker team and were able to overcome them with a mental edge. I think that Minnesota was able to push past that by catching that team off guard. A Denver team that ain't very deep at all. Minnesota is running into a very deep Mavericks team right now. Very deep Mavericks team. So, like I said, if the Minnesota Timberwolves win this series, I'll be very happy for them. You know what I mean? I like Minnesota. This is not me saying that I prefer anything. I'm a Laker fan. I don't really care who wins the series. And I would love to see Anthony Edwards and Karl get a championship this year. I really would. It would not hurt my feelings at all if they win this series. But that's not what we're measuring here. We're talking about what I see in my mind's eye. And I just see a Dallas team that has plenty to throw at the matchups of the Minnesota Timberwolves and probably more likely to score more. They're good defensively. They score better. Minnesota is a good scoring team, but they're great defensively. And I just think great offense beats great defense in a lot of cases. Home court could negate my point of view, but I don't think it's going to have that big of a deal there. I look at the psychological aspects of the home court advantage. Both of these teams have the same colors. You know what I mean? It's almost like feeling like you're being at home. I'd imagine that fans are going to travel both ways, both places, so you're going to hear cheers for the road team in both series, in both buildings, rather. I don't think home court is going to hold that much weight. It's not a altitude difference or anything like, to my knowledge. I don't know what's going on there, but I doubt it. The flight was 3 hours, 2 hours? It's not going to, I don't think home court is going to play that big of a part this series. I really don't. So that's what I'm telling y'all, man. That's what I'm telling y'all. Minnesota is considered to be the better team between the two of them. I think Minnesota's played fantastic ball and have beat some impressive teams. But I'm going to go with the Dallas Mavericks, who's been slaying giants all playoffs long, who's evolved. The team is getting better and better. The more they play with one another, the more they're finding things that they can use their work. And I think they attack Minnesota in the right areas. They match up extremely well against Minnesota, and Minnesota don't have no Kyrie. They don't. They got their Luka and Ant, but they don't have a Kyrie. And that I think is ultimately the difference for me. That's the difference. So that's what I'm saying, man. Dallas Mavericks in 7. Series could go a different way. I wouldn't be surprised. The experts say opposite. I've been wrong a lot. Very wrong in some cases. So I wouldn't doubt that this could be possible here. But I give you what I got, man. I really see Dallas winning the series. I really do. So that's pretty much what I got to say. My name is BDF44. I thank y'all for watching. I'm out.